right, welcome back. Welcome to anyone who's new here. We have a very, very exciting guest today. Our first pastor on the episode, or on the for the season, for the show, for everything.
Yes.
Pastor Angela Kelly, pastor of spiritual transformation. Is that formation?
Yeah, spiritual formation.
Spiritual formation. Yeah. So, this is a very exciting episode for me personally because, one, not only have you been in our life just through the church, but just mission trips we've been on and just the day to day. This is just very exciting. But who is Angela Kelly?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to have you both here and to be able to, dive into what it is that God has done in our lives, because we just see for that moment, right? And we don't see all the places that we've been and where God has taken us, and the learning opportunities that we've grown through. So I was born and raised in Corbett, Oregon, first of 4 kids, and I went into my own direction in high school, raised Baptist, but I began to just get a hardened heart and not want to go to church, and started getting into things I ought not get into. And I found myself in a place that I had hit bottom. And when I say hit bottom, for me, that was get in trouble with the law. That was, I wasn't living at home. I wasn't, I was in a relationship I shouldn't have been, and we were going to get married. And that escalated into, physically being, abused. And so I remember my mom one day, I stopped at home to get something to eat, and she said, "Tell me those bruises are not from him." And I said, "Well, I can't answer that." And I left, and I realized I saw the look in her eye, and I was hardened, and I didn't really have a lot of emotion. I remember thinking, I can't show that, because I need to show I have it all together. And I ended up calling my mom and saying, I need help. And so we went and got a restraining order. And I was living with Sally and Ivan. I was in high school, and I was taking care of Ivan. He had Alzheimer's, and Sally became like this spiritual mom to me. She was my godmother. And so she would care for me in a way that I needed, that tough love. And so that began my journey of like, I needed to shift the direction I was going, because I did it my way. I would get high and go out and party and just not even remember the next day. And I thought that would make me happy. I thought that would fill that void, And so I started reading my devotions at night, and I began less and less going out. And I started going to church. And
this was the original church, like from your parents, or this is a different church?
I ended up going, so that's a good question. So that was not my parents' church. I ended up giving it, I remember driving on the road, on the freeway, and I was crying out to God. Now, I hadn't talked to God in quite a long time, but I was yelling at him, and I was wanting to go back into that relationship. And so I remember throwing out my cigarette and let go of the wheel. And I think it was AC/DC. And I just screamed at the top of my lungs, and I let go of it. And I had been in a car accident, so my wheel would turn left, and it went the whole song, and it stayed right on the freeway. And I didn't wreck like I had planned. And I remember thinking, like, I can't even do this right. Like, and so I knew to turn to God, right? There's something in us that says, you're not alone in this. And so I got off the next freeway, and I ended up at a church parking lot, and I just went in. It was a Saturday night. I walked in, and he was talking right to me. And that was my turning point. And I remember people were coming up and giving me tissues, and I just thought, if you knew, if you know what I'm really about, you would be away from me. I promise you. So,
but Sally and Ivan these are your sibling
Yeah,
family?
I worked at the Vista House on the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon. So I worked there. She was my manager.
Okay.
And she had asked me to move in and help them. But what she didn't know is I was planning to leave and I didn't know where, but I was leaving in a couple of days. And I told my parents, like, I'm out of here. And so I really feel like God, orchestrated just where that would be. I was leaving, but he knew where I needed to go.
Yeah.
Did you have like a hardened heart towards your parents or towards God or all of the above?
All the above.
And was that kind of all stemming from the relationship? Or was it just a whole bunch of different things? Relationship with your, that partner at the time?
Yeah, it was. And it was a lifestyle I was living too. So you have to, you have a front, you have an attitude, you have to just be that person. And so it was, I remember thinking people that cry were weak and I didn't want anything to do with them. So I would, just kind of did my own thing. And, so that was a turning point for me. And then I ended up calling my dad, who was working at a Christian school. And I said, I think I'd like to transfer if that's possible. So he said, yeah, let me see. And so middle of my senior year, I went from Corbett to Portland Christian. And I found out what Christian people were about, and they were so much fun. And I remember thinking, like, it was really quiet because I remember thinking, like, if they knew what I was about, like, I was in I was in the courts. I was trying to get my money back. The guy I was with had drained my bank account. And so there was a lot of like legal things. And
did you share with the friends that you made at that school at the time what was going on? You were kind of living like two different lifestyles in a way.
And I changed my name too. So I went from Angie at Corbett to Angela. Mm-hmm. So I said, I'm going to be a new person. I got a purity ring, and it was a 3-in-1 ring. And I just thought, every way I can, I am living out differently. You can be the same person different. And it doesn't matter if you change locations, you're still the same person unless God does the transformation.
Yeah. Would you say, how fast did the transformation happen? Like, or like internally, when did you make a decision and it was just like your life changed all of a sudden? Or was it kind of gradual and kind of days, like small decisions that you made from day to day turned into these things that were, or was it like, this is it, I'm stopping cold turkey and I'm a different person today? Yeah,
that's a good question. So when I started Portland Christian and started being around people that were actually they were a great example of how to actually enjoy life authentically. And I craved that, and so I remember, like, okay, I didn't want to sell weed. I didn't want to do it anymore. So I knew I was done with that. I think quitting smoking was the hardest for me. But I knew that was where I was headed. So I chewed gum a lot, which is why I can't anymore because my jaw hurts so much. But I chewed gum a lot just because I wanted to replace a habit with something that was better. Because if this is God's temple and He has a plan for me, then my way wasn't working, and I did everything I thought would make me happy, and I was miserable. So I just thought, if this didn't work, I'm going to do your way. And I started going to that church. I started bringing my friends. After a party, I would say, I'm heading to church, and they'd be like, can I go too? And so we would go, and they'd be high. I wasn't. And then more and more started coming. And so it just became a new way of living. I also had a friend that passed away during that time. That really was a hard blow as well, because he was a big, he was a big part of our friend group. So I think all of that in reality, like, I'm not invincible, and I maybe don't have all the answers when I thought I did.
And what about like your previous friends, and they kind of see you going through this change?
Yeah.
How did that play
crazy. Out? Yeah, I was called a Bible thumper. And I was told this is a phase. She'll blow out of it. She'll come through it. And some didn't believe. I had somebody call me and were like, "How do I know that this is really?" He was a Christian. at Corbett, and he was like, how do I know this is really who you are now? Like, I've seen you, and it's hard to believe. And so I think I think different people had different comments would come up to me. I found out later there was a group of girls that I'm still friends with to this day that were praying for me during that time. And I'm so grateful to them. When I'm in Corbett, I like to go visit them when I'm back home, just because they'll always be those people that you don't realize who's praying for you, and you don't realize the value of prayer until you are made aware of it and you see what God does behind the scenes. And I think it's really powerful to grasp what really who he brings into your life, and then also, for a season and for a reason, and also who he removes from your life as well.
Do you think being like the oldest played a big part in why life kind of went the way it went? Because me personally, I have a lot of step siblings and whatnot, but I'm the oldest in our house now, and that's been like that my whole life. So there is pressure being the oldest, and I would say that rebellion for me kind of came in, and that's why I was really, it's hard not to be attracted to that stuff now, the worldly stuff, right? The partying and all that. But can you talk about that? Like, how did that come? How do you think that stemmed from? Was it like parent relationships that really just kind of interfered with that close relationship that you're looking with God? Because that's a big part for me, where it was, I had never saw eye to eye with my parents, and they're religious. My mom is really religious. So growing up, I knew Jesus was there, but I just didn't care,
Yeah. And I, as I can relate to, how many siblings did you say you had?
Oh boy. Like 10
Okay.
in total.
Okay. So
that I know of.
Big family.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'm one of 4. And, I think, as you have a relationship with God, you see what is the religion side and then what is the relationship. And so, in church, you can see where there's a lot of rules, but then there's no grace. And then you can have a lot of grace, and then there's no checks and balances. There's no, just walking out what it is to obey Christ, right? What it is to walk in his ways, not because he's keeping you from something, he's for you. He's trying, and having that protection. So I think, for me and the way that I'm wired, the way that God made me is I'm very strong-willed. So it takes me quite a bit, but I'm pretty headstrong. So if I'm determined in something, I'm gonna do it all the way. My motto is go hard or go home. So it takes me a minute to wrap my head around if it's not working right. And so I think, if we're either listening to the world or we're listening to what God is saying, and when we have a hardened heart, we can't allow him in to speak to us, right? And so it's what are we listening to that's most loudly playing within our mind.
What's so interesting is you talk about that go hard or go home. That is at the same time, it's so biblical, because that's what God calls us to be. He calls us to be all in for him. It's not 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I think that's how, one of the ways you went all in on Christ, and that just shifted so much of your life. And I think the difference is, and what a lot of people struggle in the transformation aspect, is that they're not all in. They still want to have 1 foot in the party scene.
Doesn't work.
And 1 foot in the other scene, and they're living a contradictory life. And where the growth happens is when you start to let go of the things that are holding you back. And I think that go hard or go home, just as much it could help you, it can hurt you too.
Sure.
But I found that so interesting, because I've also seen it when, I've seen it on mission trips, and I've seen that, and which I do want to get to, which I think this is a good point. And like, how did that happen? How did you go on your first mission trip? How did you become the mission trip leader that you are today? Like when did you first figure out that that God was calling you to do that?
Yeah, it was. So like I said, I went to Portland Christian, and I had met a group of great girls that were seniors there. And one girl, her name was Tracy, and I had asked her, what are your plans? And she said, I'm going to go into YWAM, Youth with a Mission. She said it's based in Maui, in Paia, and she said, I'm going to do that. And she says, what about you? I said, well, I'm looking into the Army. I was looking into going into being a nun, or I was looking into going to Baja, Mexico, because Sally and Ivan go every year, and I was going to take care of them, and I had in my heart to write a book. And so I said, I write poetry. So I was going to write my poetry book. And she goes, I said, tell me a little bit about YWAM. So she tells me, and in my head, I'm thinking they would never let me go. Like, I would have to lie on all of the paperwork. Like, and so she says, let me get an application for you. So she gets me an application, and I fill it out, and you have to have references and all this. And
Did you have to lie?
I did. I was like, it's just, I don't know how to get around this.
Yeah.
But I knew the direction I was going. So anyways, and to reference you, I wasn't looking backwards like Sodom and Gomorrah. When you look back, that's when you end up getting messed up. Mm-hmm. It's you got to keep your eyes going forward. And so he talks about running the race, right? In the Bible, Paul says, run the race and throw off the things that easily entangle you. Well, those things will trip you up looking back. So anyways, I filled it out. They accepted me. So it was 2.5 months training, and then 2.5 months outreach. And I had told you I had a lawyer, right? And I was going through stuff back home. And one comment the lawyer had made is, just whatever you do when you go on missions, just don't ever go to India. He's like, it'll burn you out. And he's like, and as a, single girl, he's like, just don't go there. I'm like, okay. So that was kind of rolling in my head, which is interesting because some things don't stick and some things do. And for some reason that stuck. And so when India was an option, I was like, well, that's not an option. I'm going to look at the other two options. And one was Thailand, Singapore, and there was another one. I can't think of the other location. And so every time I would go, we're supposed to pray, and then we're supposed to hear from God, and then we're supposed to tell our leaders, right? So every day I'd be like, okay, God, what's it going to be? Which two locations? And every day I'd wake up and something else was wrong with me. Like one day I woke up, I had a sty in my eye. One day I woke up and I had cold sores all over my mouth. I woke up and I lost my voice. And then another day I woke up and I fell and I skinned my legs. It kept going. And I was just like, I am like a wreck. So I think it was like on a Thursday, and this had been going on all week. And I was sitting on the beach in Paia, and I was like, God, I had a sty, so like tears would just run out of one eye. I had a cold sore, and then I have no voice. So like, God, where do you want me to go? And I heard him say, go over the ridge. So I'm like, okay, that's done. Not telling me, but whatever. So I go over the ridge, and this big Jamaican guy is shooting hoop on the basketball. He's playing music. And I said, okay. And he says, I want you to go tell him about me. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. So I turned around and I went back. And if you've ever argued with God, you have a choice right there. Are you going to do again what you want to do? Which I had said, I did it my way and it didn't work. So now you go back to your core, which is that didn't work. And now he's giving you instructions. Do you obey it? So I'm like, all right, said I'm all in. So I ran back to over the ridge, over to Ricky, and now he's doing push-ups. And I walk up to him, and now I'm whispering, remember, and I've got, and the tear kept going. I'm like this, and I said, as he's doing his push-ups, I'm like, can I talk to you for a second? And so he stands up, and I just said, and I'm as loud as I can in a whisper saying, I just wanted to invite you to the weigh in. I said, I'm here with Youth at the Mission, and I'd love to have you join us on Tuesday night. And he says, I know where it is. and he's got his great thick Jamaican accent. He says, I've lived here for 7 years and no one's ever asked me. And he said, I'll be there. And I said, okay, and I'm like, all right, it's a great conversation. And I just took off because I was late. Going to, we have classes. So I run into the weigh-in. I'm sitting there and I'm just like, God, what was that? The lecture's going. And I felt like God said, you have made India so big and out of reach, just like you thought he was so big and that he was not within your reach. And he said, but I am the one that goes before you, and I am the one that ministers to hearts. And he said, you go for the one. And I was like, I'm going to India. And I just remember going, I really am going. And so I walked over to my leader. Her name was Tavia Taylor. And I just said, I'm going to India. And she goes, we all know. So they had already prayed about it, and God had confirmed that within them, because that's another thing. They have to confirm it. And it was really cool. And part of the YWAM is you can't go with anyone that you previously have known before your DTS, Discipleship Training School. And Tracy had already put in that she was going to India. And because of how that happened, they said, no, we know you're supposed to be here. So they allowed a previous friendship to go together. But that's usually one of the rules, is that you don't go with anyone you know.
How do you distinguish like God's voice?
That's
a great question, because it could never come from you. I would never, to go and talk to this guy that was, that's not something I enjoyed doing. Like, I didn't want to do that. I literally was like, I'm not doing that. But I think when it coincides with God's word, it's on point. And when it is a thought that comes in that you're like, either it's too big and there's no way I could have thought of that. It's a God-size goal or a God-size idea, or that you're just like, I was totally thinking about something else, and that just, came into my mind. But it's like it's loud. It's just audible for me, anyways. And I know God speaks to people differently, right? But yeah, it's that discerning. And he says, my sheep hear my voice and they know me. And so when, ask and wanting that, that's what I was doing every day, right? Like, God, talk to me, like, tell me. And I was setting aside an hour of just, I'm not moved. You got to tell me. But yet I wasn't giving all the options to him either. Right. No. I was limiting him on what his answers could possibly be. So he wants our heart. He wants all of us. And so again, it's having that one thing behind your back and saying, well, you can have everything else, but this is mine. And that's, when we do that, then we can praise him. Then we have our hands open. And we're able to receive it also that way.
Yeah. So I just want to bring it back a little bit. When you talked about that you were in the car and your AC/DC was playing, letting go of the steering wheel.
Oh, yeah.
You said you thought about going back to your ex with the restraining order guy, and you're reaching out to God, and I know you get off the exit, but humans have these emotions that it doesn't just also go away within a couple seconds, right? Granted, there's supernatural can happen.
Sure.
How did you find that love more for God instead of saying, okay, I don't need to go back, although, we've talked about it where we get in these situations that we're in a better spot and we look back where we were worse, and I compared to Dylan, about the Israelites in the desert looking back at Egypt and saying, oh, we should have just been there. Right. Meanwhile, it was torture, slavery. So your past was bad. So again, how did you find that love more for him instead of everything else that, it brings that satisfaction, but it was, it wasn't fulfilling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What we fixate on grows. And so, what you meditate on, what you think about grows. For me, the restraining order also held me accountable, because I knew I could be in trouble for going back on that restraining order, which I had to get to, by the way. As soon as it ended, things got heated again. So I had to go back. But I did have a selective memory, and I kept thinking, oh, no one knows him like I do. He needs me and all these things. And again, I had to have that checks and balances. What am I thinking? Is that truth? Is that really how it was? Or am I having this pitch? Am I painting this picture that's not a reality? Now, back then we had pagers. And so I had a pager on me, and I had different friends that would page me, and I had to get to a payphone and answer them to make sure that he didn't, I mean, it was bad. I had to be accountable to my friends. And I thought, well, they care enough about me, but my value had gone down. And so I needed to care enough about myself to be able to, and at that point, I don't think I really had that. I didn't have that value. I started going, I told you, that church in Gresham. And then I started going to being mentored by the pastor's wife. And so she helped me just really discover. I took a codependency class. She paired me up with somebody to really define who I am in Christ, and how that had been diminished. And I didn't even see it. When you're so far in it, you need others to be accountable to and to care for you. And so it's really mindful of who you allow in your life. You got to be mindful of trusting people around you when you're in it, too.
No, that's beautiful. All right. I think this is a good spot to just take a break, but thank you for that answer. It helps me out a bit. All right. So, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll be right back at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
How's it going, Kaya listeners? We hope you guys are enjoying this first part of this episode this season, and we're dropping new episodes every Monday and Wednesday for you guys.
If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share. You can find us on Instagram at Kaya_pod, where you can find the links to our Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Before we go, we'd like to leave you with a blessing from the book of Numbers. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Thank you so much for listening, Kaya listeners, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you guys.